Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Van Helsing. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Let you know off the top, obviously this was a back-to-back episode thing, but I'm watching these episodes one at a time and then reviewing them, so the other two episodes, which I haven't watched yet, those reviews should be going up at least within the next 15 to 30 minutes of this one getting uploaded, hopefully. So just letting you know that ahead of time. But at first we start off with like Axel and Violet, trying to like get some information on how they can sneak into DC and everything. Which really quickly, this episode also kind of brought up something interesting that I talked about maybe an episode or two ago. I never really thought about it until partway through the season, but it was like, right. Aside from the first 3 episodes, you don't see like random people. Like at least in the past seasons and stuff like that, there was always like other people around, like they ran into other survivors, and there wasn't much of that at this point in the season. So like this little town or whatever for them to get information, plus the bikers they run into later on, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know whether that was a production thing or not. I mean, to be fair, maybe they decided to only do that for the first 3 episodes since you were like in the past and it was a town and everything, and you made the justification it's the apocalypse, so there's not going to be that many people out and about when you're running into people. It's not like it was all the time, but it was enough to make you go like, oh, see that there were more people out there. It was just something interesting where I'm like, oh, this is like the first episode you really got to see like other people, technically speaking. I mean, the last time we saw a group of people was like the episode with Nina and Julius, because like Nina had already like bled most of those people dry, so they were already dead, so it doesn't really count. Regardless, what was interesting though, it's like when Violet is just chilling and this dude, we end up finding his name's Aaron. I'm like, he recognizes her. I'm like, at first I was like, wait, does he know Violet from the past or something like that? It's like, no, I saw you on TV. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That hasn't come up too much. It's come up a little bit, but it's only because like obviously people have access to the TV and all that was like government officials, so I guess that should have been a sign of like the fact is you had it, and like because not many people are going to recognize Violet, but he does, because obviously people have heard whispers about Vanessa and stuff like that. I still don't think words come out about Violet and Jack except for like the TV situation. That's the only thing. Like other than that, it's word of mouth about Vanessa. But nevertheless, Aaron's going to help them if Violet can help him, but then all of a sudden the guys from the biker gang end up taking him, and I'm like, obviously Axel didn't get the help he wanted, like trying to find a way into DC, but it's like, hey, maybe if we find out more about this guy, maybe he could end up leading us. I mean, he did offer to help if we helped him in return. So they end up talking to the dude who runs the shop, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's Yellow Jacket from the TV show Beyond, that actor. I believe that's him, but I could be mistaken. So basically, Aaron's kind of like on a hacking thing, like he gets like circuit boards and stuff like that. It's like, what's that all about? So obviously, they ultimately track him down where he's being held and everything. And I thought this kind of neat moment between Axel and Violet, where it's like he's looking at her, he's like, I got a little bit of vibe. He's like, you got a plan? She's like, I got a plan. I'm like, I don't know why. Just in that moment, it felt a little bit like his interaction with like Jack last season when they were going to break into the arena where the battles are taking place. It reminded me of that, but it also kind of reminded almost like an interaction between like him and Vanessa and Scarlet. It felt like that. I don't know. But they, go in to help Aaron, and it turns out he wants their help in return, and that help is to save his dad. His dad, we find out, is the previous president, Davis Park. I'm like, oh, which I believe we just saw that actor recently in this past season of Nancy Drew as Amanda and Gil's dad, I believe. But obviously, sci-fi-wise, most recently was him as... not most recently, but he was in the show Continuum. That's kind of another thing I know him from. But regardless, I thought that was an interesting development of like, whoa, not where I saw that story going. Like, I thought like, I figured like, he's a hacker or something like that. But essentially, there's like a communication array like he wants to use to try and track down his mom and his sister because they got separated when the Rising happened. So, also, is this the first time they've ever specifically said that it's been 4 years since the Rising? I thought that was so interesting. So I guess like at some point during the show, I'd assume maybe between season 3 to 4, there was a time skip at some point in time, just like enough time passed that it's been 4 years now. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I was like, are we still technically in 2019? It's like, no, apparently we're in 2020. That's interesting. I guess production-wise, like, if this show could have gotten released last year, it would have, so it would have fit, like, the show would have ended in 2020, like, where show is, time frame wise. So just interesting to think about. But because if you're unaware, I'm kind of a stickler for like knowing the exact time frame a story's told. So Aaron wants their help. Like, you turn my dad back because he's the only one that can have access to this communications array. But it's kind of, we'll only help you if you help us. But Aaron's kind of a little dodgy around the thing. It's like, fine, I can help you. You help me find, like, get my dad back, and I use the communication array to find my mom and my sister, and you can have it do whatever you want to. And it's like, okay, now you're talking our language. But then the bikers show up, in particular the leader, Hopper. Violet gets shot in the process, but not before she turns Davis back. Because to them, it's like, oh, fake news. Because I think that was all, like, covered up to be like, oh, that was BS. I mean, once again, it's just like, it's not big news about what Vanessa can do, but other people as well being able to do it. Like, that's still just rumors in the apocalypse. But luckily, they were able to bring Davis back. And obviously, Aaron and, Violet kind of hit it off, because for Aaron, he talks about the fact is that he never really had many friends, I think. Well, he talks about this later on, that he never had many friends because of being the president's kid and stuff. Violet's probably like the first person he's really become friends with, which at first I was like, oh, is there something there? But I'm like, no, I think the way she was talking to Jack the other episode, it seemed like, no, she's pretty keen on like the whole her and Lee thing of that kind of still happening. So I don't see her like this happening, but I think it's just like, no, we're friends, plus you're the president's kid and stuff like that. So he basically talked about how why it is that he ended up surviving, why his dad ended up turning and he didn't, how he got separated from his mom and sister. Like, they were in Virginia at the time that they were at the White House, and they were trying to evacuate, but during the process, like, his dad ended up getting bit. So that's an interesting story just in its own right, of like, we didn't get the full story, but he had to like lock himself in another part of the limo, put on like the bulletproof glass so that his dad couldn't get through, because the vehicle was made sure that it could survive like a terrorist attack. And I guess this is kind of like the more supernatural, magical version of it. But he never thought that he'd be able to get his dad back or see him again, and now he finally does. So it kind of gave him hope. That's what he's been holding on to this entire time, because this is a world where a lot of people have kind of lost hope, like reuniting with the people you care about, because that was something even Axel was like, it's been like 4 years, like, but for Aaron, it's like, no, I believe they're still alive. He has to. Like, that hope is the only thing that keeps so many people going nowadays, in particular for him. It's like knowing that Violet was out there and like, I could get my dad back, then, what other possibilities are there out there in this world? Which we also got the interesting conversation between Axel and Hopper, too, about, like, why he did what he did. It's like, how did a biker gang end up looking after the president? It's like, I didn't even vote for the guy. I didn't really agree with his politics. But at the end of the day, I guess he's very patriotic in his own regard, because he is the president, and that means something. When the world has gone crazy and everything's kind of fallen down, he still is the president. Granted, technically he's not, because he died. I also thought it was interesting that, like, Hanson's the one that told Violet, like, oh, I thought you were dead. It's like, well, of course you're dead. Because I never think about it too much. It's like, obviously he has connections to the government, the whole black tech thing. Of course he has connections to the government. It's just interesting to think about, like, yeah, you never really covered the fact is that he infiltrated the government and stuff like that, put himself in a very, like, high enough position. Makes you wonder, did he ever meet the president? Probably not. It's just probably like a military contract and stuff like that with the government. So that's probably all it was. So probably no direct interactions. But it's just, remember, Avery was going to report, like, on all the stuff that Hanson was up to because she didn't trust him. So it's just interesting to think about, like, it just kind of threw me for a second thinking about, like, oh, like, why would he admit? It's like, well, to be fair, everyone thought the president was dead, so. It's also interesting to know that that's an angle we're touching, but to be fair, we touched on that angle for the first time last season and never thought we would have brought up the president. And it's like, oh, the president's alive. And now we found out, oh, the previous president's alive, that Archer ended up taking over because this particular president, Davis, ended up dying. But it's basically because it meant something, that it's so important because it was the structure of our society. It meant something. It mattered. So him protecting and keeping Davis alive, regardless of anything, it made him feel like, there was a reason for it, like, for things to kind of play out this way. He's like, he's like, it probably sounds crazy, like, protecting something you don't fully understand. And it's like, Axel understands more so than anyone, It's actually befitting to have this episode after reuniting with Vanessa again, after being separated for so long. But also, it's like, because that was their situation. He watched over her for 3 years because of a mission. Didn't understand it, but went through it anyway. And luckily, because of that, we are here where we are right now. But when the time came, it's like, right, we can kill the Dark One, and then you can take over as the president. In fact, you as the president could get us inside of DC without issue, but it's like, no, I can't. My authority isn't what it once was. I'm supposed to be dead. They're not really going to believe me. It's like, well, we need to try, but he's not even willing to try because he's so certain that things aren't going to work out. And I think we kind of explain more later on of why that is, why in particular he had given up hope, why he was so, rather than just being like, because his son was like, no, like, hope's still alive, we could do this, Dad. Well, it's like, technically it's the football, but it's also like the communications array, like basically get in contact with the Pentagon themselves, which is interesting to see that the Pentagon, it's interesting to see in totality that like DC in general is still pretty intact. But I guess it makes sense. It's the heart of the government, so it makes sense that it'd be the most fortified place. But it's just interesting from the outside looking like, when we see it at the end of the episode, I'm like, the Pentagon's super still. I mean, to be fair, the White House, from what we saw of it, was still pretty intact as well. But Aaron's dad, like, Davis isn't willing to kind of try. He just kind of given up. But Aaron has it. And it's like, fine, if you're going to be too much of a coward to look for Mom and Tina, I'm going to do it on my own if I have to. Which, Violet's like, fine, I'll go with you. Then, like, we help you with this. Then we can potentially convince your dad to, like, help us get into, DC. And he was like, oh, there you are. Just like my dad, caught up in your own BS. Which she's like, whoa, I watched my dad die in front of me. Don't think like your feelings are more valid than anyone else's. And he's like, well, then you understand why I gotta do what I gotta do. But also at the same time, it's like, she just told you what her mission is. We gotta kill the Dark One and free the world from vampires. And you're like, oh, you're caught up in your own yeah, she's caught up in the bullshit that is caught up in her own shit. Her own shit is everyone else's shit as well. This is about saving the world. So don't, like, that's a little, like, messed up to be like, oh, you're just caught up in your own shit. Yeah, I'm trying to save the world, douchebag. That's why I was like, what? But I get it. You're a heightened state because it's like, you have the potential to track down your mom and sister now, so you're trying to take it. But, as they went along to, find them, they end up getting attacked by some vampires. I was almost wondering, like, were they going to find out, like, his mom and sister were one of them or something like that, but turned out not to be the case. But then, like, in a process, well, one of them bit Violet, but I guess he was so feral, he was so far gone that, I was about to say, we never saw him actually turn into a human. You would think he would have, but it's like, right, he was probably so far gone that, like, there's no human left in him that he just died, so. But then, like, Aaron ends up getting bit. That's never come up before in the show, like, that quick of a turnaround. That's actually interesting. I was like, oh, could she bite you immediately and stop it? Like, what is that? I'm getting too technical into it, but I'm like, I wonder what does that mean? The fact is he was almost a vampire, but then got bit and turned back human immediately. Then I'm like, what does that mean for you? Like, the process didn't have long, the process is within seconds. It doesn't take long to come back as a vampire. But I'm like, she was able to stop it before the transformation even really fully started. So would he technically even have any of the benefits? Or like, if it was like a daywalker or whatever, like, would he have had the benefits considering like it never really had a chance to course through his veins first? I don't know, just something to think about. I just thought that was fascinating. At the same time, Axel, Hopper, and one of his guys go looking for Violet and Aaron. And, for Davis, he decides to go along because for him it's like, you've taken care of my son in the time I was going, and I'm thankful for that, but it's time for me to step up to the plate. I need to be the one to kind of convince my son to come back. So, on the ride there, Davis is blaming himself. He's like, it's like, oh, no one could have known what was happening. He's like, I did. And it's like, wait, what? Yeah, it's like, what did, the president gets to immediately, first month after I got sworn in, you learn all the secrets, and the secrets include vampires, which I was like, really? But how do you, I was like, right, to be fair, Dimitri in general was, I guess he was like, because he was held captured for a long time, and they experimented on him, so there's probably plenty of information on him, so that was like secret hush government stuff. But I was like, right, so they would know about vampires and stuff like that. He knew about it, but he didn't want to really acknowledge it. He wanted to pretend like it didn't exist. It's like crazy to believe that vampires exist, even though the information is being presented to you. And for him, he blames himself. It's like, I'm the reason why it all fell apart. But Axel's like, just because you knew about the vampires, you didn't know that the rising was going to happen, like the volcano ash. Like, no one saw that coming. But he's like, I should have taken the necessary precautions the moment I found out vampires were a thing. Like, all this death, all this destruction, all this loss is on me. And I think that's why he's kind of shattered more. Because I think the whole thing of like what happened to Tina, and later on they end up finding out Tina and his wife are gone. And I think that's an extra layer of it. That's because he had already accepted the fact that they were gone because the last communication like he had, but Aaron didn't want to believe that. So I think all that weighed on Davis, that like I'm the one responsible for my for all of this, so much death and destruction, and it's like that's a heavy burden to kind of take upon yourself. Eventually they end up where Violet and Aaron were, but by the time they got there they were already gone. A vampire hidden underneath the sand ends up attacking, and Hopper sacrifices himself for Davis. And it's like, you got a good kid, just don't be too harsh on him. Just, see this through, kind of bring the world back, be the one to kind of change everything back, make it kind of worth it in the end, And it's kind of sad, especially Hopper being that pseudo father for Aaron in that time when his dad was a vampire. By the time they catch up, Aaron finds out the truth about his parents. His mom and his sister. It's always that complicated thing of, is it better to know the truth or not? Because if he did know the truth, he would have just kept looking the rest of his life never knowing, and maybe knowing is better. It's the sad, reality that they're not in, because he'd held on to that hope. But for his dad, it's like, I'm going to make things right. For their sake, for everyone's sake, for every victim of this world, I'm going to make it right. Like, we're going to restore this world back to the way it was. But it's like, Aaron's by his side during it. It's like, no, like, you got me, and then Violet's like, you got me, Axel, as well as like the Hopper's right-hand dude as well. So obviously Axel doesn't want the president coming along with them, because they got to find those routes that Hopper was talking about. It's like a coyote route that could get them into DC, which I'm curious to kind of see the infrastructure of DC and like see like maybe the ins and outs of it to a certain extent, and just see like what's what there. But they can't put the president himself in danger. Like, they need him kind of somewhere safe with the bikers and everything, so that when the time comes, he can reclaim his position and bring a little more order back to everything. But he does end up contacting the Pentagon and talking to someone, and it's like, okay, before you blow me up, tracking this and hit us with the missile, there's certain truths you need to know, that's going to be a hard pill to swallow. To be fair, it's like, yeah, you got to convince him I'm not a vampire, I'm real, I'm not dead, but then you also have to tell him, like, right, also the president, it's not really the president, it's an ancient vampire in disguise, so that's a whole pill to swallow. Oh, Avery too, so a lot of interesting developments. Like I said, not where I thought this was going with the president and stuff like that, especially at the tail end of the season. Interesting time to throw that in there too. To be fair, that was pretty late-ish in the season 4 when the whole president situation got brought up last season as well. So I'm really interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Like I said, I haven't watched the next episode yet, but I'm going to immediately after this. So, but really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.